Welcome everybody to another Formations event run by Nottingham Trent University's Postcolonial and Global Studies Group and the Bonington Gallery. And today I'm delighted to be able to be in conversation with Karim Iliya, who's a photographer, filmmaker, whale swimming guide and former dearMoon crew member who's based in Iceland. He also co-founded Kogia, a nature conservation non-profit. Karim grew up in the Middle East and Asia, where he developed a curiosity for the natural world, and he has spent his life exploring volcanoes, battling whales, ice worlds of the Arctic, and incredible places globally where both humans and animals are at home. He is a photographer and filmmaker, and a lot of his work is on hidden underwater worlds. He documents places all over the earth in an effort to protect Earth's delicate ecosystems. He's worked in over 50 countries, won multiple awards, and his work has been featured in distinguished magazines, documentaries, and other publications. So I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to meet and to talk to Karim Iliya today. So thank you very much for being here, Karim.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to ask a kind of big, general, open question first of all. It would just be really wonderful to hear more about your career. So, how you began in photography and how you decided to work in wildlife photography.
As a kid, I really wanted some form of outlet of art. I wasn't very good at mechanical skills like painting and drawing. And when I discovered a little point and shoot camera, I could take pictures of the world around me and dive into the world of these other animals and creatures, and whether it's a bug or a cat or a tree, to try and just show a different perspective and show things in a way that people don't normally see. Um, it allowed me to play with light, and with different views and see how things change, and also to create memories that I could look back on. In the beginning, I wasn't very good at it, but like anything, when you practice, you get a lot better. And I kept doing it and was fascinated in everything, photographing people and people's daily lives around me, as well as really anything that I came across. But I've always loved animals and nature and wildlife, and that's something that kept bringing me back. And I would spend time, in the garden, looking at a lizard and watching it hunt and photographing it, hiding behind a flower and catching little insects. And I kept doing that, and that evolved to bigger and bigger animals, and then eventually took me underwater as well, where I would start photographing ocean and animals that are in freshwater, and that's been quite a fantastic journey.
So, how did you make that transition to the underwater photography and to whales in particular?
Yeah, I was spending a lot of time in Hawaii because my parents are windsurfers, and me and my brother kept thinking about getting an underwater case for our camera. But at the time, and even now, the underwater case is as expensive as the camera, and this was just still on a little point and shoot 4 megapixel camera, um, and we were looking at these specifically these turtles that were diving under the waves where we were surfing. And I kept wondering, what the turtles were doing under the waves. So I started, first with a mask and snorkel, looking and seeing, and then I brought a camera with me, and these turtles were eating algae off of the rocks while waves were breaking overhead. And you have this crazy scenario where it looks like storm clouds moving in time lapse fast forward, very violent and chaotic above the turtles, on the surface, but underwater quite peaceful with these pillars of bubbles that would swirl around, and the turtles are just calmly eating algae off the rock. So I started to photograph those turtles, trying to avoid also getting run over by a surfer. It was quite a chaotic scenario. And then from there also continued to photograph smaller animals like coral and little fish, and then bigger animals as well.
Mm. And how about your experience photographing whales then? I mean, we're going to talk a lot about that, but I wonder, because you also lead exhibitions as well, swim with whales expeditions. And I wondered if you could talk about the difference between those two things. So taking people out to see whales on your expeditions and just being able to construct your own time and spend as much time as you want to with whales. How do those two things differ?
So when I was living in Hawaii and photographing turtles, and I was working on a whale watching boat, where in the wintertime we would go on whale watching trips, and from the surface I would take photos of whales, jumping and playing and interacting with each other. And in the summer I was on these snorkel trips. Um, and I kept wanting to, yearning to be in the water with the whales to see what was happening under the surface.
Mm.
There was this calm, glassy day when I could look down and see everything that was happening. And I just wanted to be, I expressed how I wanted to be in the water. And there was an Australian guest on the boat who told me that I should go to a place called Tonga where I could get in the water with the whales. And so, that night I went home and I looked it up, and I booked a trip to Tonga to go swimming with humpback whales. And that was a fantastic experience. I got to be in the midst of whales that were fighting with each other over mating rights, seeing mothers and calves, the mother lifting her calf up to the surface to breathe, a very young calf, interacting with the calf, this giant wild animal that comes over to look at you curiously and play with you. And I got to see a variety of these interactions, and I was hooked. But the problem is that it's quite expensive to go and all the
Right.
way out to the South Pacific and to go on a boat and swim with whales. So it took me a few years, and I had a photo published in National Geographic. It's a 2-page spread, and many people seeing the whale photos, asking me how they could do it, and eventually I set up a trip to bring other people. So I organized the logistics for food and accommodation and the boat, and this is a place that it's not easy to run logistics, so it took quite uh, an undertaking to put it all together. And I found that I had accidentally started an ocean safari company. So this was my means of being able to spend time in the water with whales.
Mm.
So what that means is I kind of I do two things at the same time. I guide people in the water. I take them to come face to face with these animals in the ocean, in the hope that it will connect them with nature and the ocean and the different animals that are in there. Because most people's interaction with the ocean is one of extraction. It's to take for food. You know, and very few people actually get to go in the water and see. If anything, people just lay on the shore. Maybe they'll snorkel and look at some fish if they're very lucky. And so taking people into a more deeper view of the water and the ocean can connect them up. And using whales as a vessel that gets people to care. If you protect whales, then you protect all the other creatures around them. So that's one side of things. I take people to swim with whales in the ocean, but while I'm there, I also have my camera and I'm photographing and documenting the lives of the whales.
Mm.
So I don't have time to myself usually
Right.
with these animals, and I kind of work around helping other people to come face to face with them while also documenting their lives.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, that's surprising then that you managed to capture these images while having to run a trip as well for your visitors. Um, I first came across your photography when I saw your image of a humpback whale calf feeding from its mother's milk. And this is a photograph which was nominated for the Natural History Museum's Wildlife Photographer of the Year award. And it seems ridiculous to say, but most people probably don't realize that whales produce milk and feed their young. Even though people know that whales are mammals, they don't make that connection. So I think that's why it's such a striking image in some ways. And it creates the new kind of way of having a relationship between humans and whales. Um, I wonder if you could talk about your experience of taking that particular photograph.
Yeah. It is incredibly rare to see whale milk.
Mm.
Oftentimes, even when humpback whale mother and calf are quite social, and the calf is playing with you, and the mother is very calm and at peace with her calf being with you, when it's time for the calf to feed or to drink milk, they'll often go away. They'll just go a little bit farther away, and we, give them the space. We wait till they're done, and then then the calf will be ready to socialize again. So I had never, in many years, I'd never seen whale milk, but I had always been very interested in seeing it. And on this particular day, all of a sudden, there was this floating swirl in the water. Now, whales, they don't have nipples, so what calf does is it stimulates this area, and then milk comes out. And because whales don't have lips or nipples, they have to scoop it out of the water. So the milk has to hold together. It's very thick, fatty milk. And so it holds together, and then the calf just scoops it all up. So normally you just don't see it at all. You might see, the calf down below drinking milk and a little bit of white, and you see that the calf is drinking milk. But um, for some reason, I don't know whether this mother was, just producing milk without any stimulation, or whether the calf was not drinking it. But I saw this milk floating in the water, and I immediately dove down to go and start photographing it and filming it. Um, and what I did not expect, as I was kind of getting to the end of my breath hold, ready to come up, I saw the calf rising up in just behind where the milk was to go and get a breath of air.
Mm.
And so I had to, in that moment, I thought, this is a photo that I will never see again. I need to make this work. And so I moved the camera over, focused on the whale, brought the camera back, and managed to get just a few images as the calf was rising up with the milk swirling, to give it that context to understand what this was. And I immediately knew I had a photo that is very unique. If you look for photos of whale milk, you might just see a white blob on the internet that somebody took. But I think this might be the only one of a swirl of milk with a whale in it. So that was very exciting, and it felt like I had finally captured an image of something very unique.
Yeah. You talked about some of the practicalities when you shared the photograph on your Facebook page. And I'd love to hear a bit more of your experience of seeing whale calves with their mothers, or other kinds of parenting or family interactions. How might you describe typical young whale behavior, typical whale family behavior, or kind of parenting behavior? What kind of parents do whales make?
Yeah, whales are complex animals, very much like people, in the sense that they have different personalities, they have different moods, they have different social dynamics. You have some whales, some mothers that are very nervous and very shy, and they are very protective. And those ones, typically, you just leave them and they go on their way. You also have you have mothers that are very easygoing, very open, and they want their calf to play with you. And then likewise, you also have calves that can be shy or calves that can be social. Sometimes you have a calf, baby whale, that is hiding behind its mother, just peeking out like a little kid who is hiding behind its parents' legs and looking shyly. Other times you have calves that are they just go right out there, and the mother has to, go and collect them and bring them back. And that means that, we also have to be responsible in how we interact. Like, we can't just take the calf away playing with it, because if the mother is sleeping, she's resting and relying on the fact that you're not going to, distract her calf too far away. And so it's quite a fun dynamic to see and experience, because they're normally in the wild, most animals are quite afraid of people, because we have hunted them relentlessly, for thousands and thousands of years. But in the ocean, animals are less used to humans being there and hunting them. So they're much more comfortable. Now, you still have a size factor, where most animals in the ocean are smaller than people. And so, naturally, smaller size means run away. With whales, you have these intelligent wild animals that are also incredibly gentle. And so you have a scenario where you can interact with them on their terms, where there are times when, the mother just wants to rest, and she's quite happy to have people be there and occupying and playing with her calf. Now, we do that in, short bursts, so that the calf has time to also interact with its mother, to drink milk, to sleep. But like any kid, they don't have very good energy management, so they'll like play and play and play and be super excited, and then just crash. And I've seen humpback whale babies fall asleep, just in the water while floating up to the surface, and then they get to the surface, they wake up, they take a breath, go back down, and then fall asleep again. And it's very cute. There's different dynamics, it's usually mother and calf, but then there can be what we call escort whales, which is, it could be a male that is there protecting them. Maybe he wants to mate with mother. It could also be another female that is there socializing. You can have juveniles, but like people, usually the young ones are the most curious and confident and playful, and the old ones are more stoic, and they have, a spatial bubble and boundary, and they are less interested in playing. However, there are situations where you can have adult whales that are also very curious and playful, and that is a whole other wild scenario, because an adult whale that wants to play with you doesn't have a mother to hold it back and keep it, calm. And so you can have, these giants that just want to be next to you, and sometimes even try and lift you out of the water. And they've got these sharp barnacles on their fins, so that it can get quite hectic. But generally speaking, whales are very gentle with humans, particularly, and other animals.
That's so fascinating to hear all of that behavior. I think that photograph of whale milk has such significant impact potential, such potential for people to think differently about whales as a result of seeing that image, like, partly because it's so unexpected, rare, so surprising, and partly because it connects humans with other mammals by drawing attention to the things that we share. Um, my work and my research on breastfeeding, and my work on artists and writers who represent breastfeeding, can sometimes receive quite a mixed response. So some people aren't keen on hearing about it, or they have quite entrenched views about it. And some of the artists and writers who I've spoken to have also had sometimes quite hostile or difficult responses to their work and their research as well. But people all seem to very much enjoy thinking about animals feeding their young or how
Mm.
animals parent. And I wondered whether you could just talk a little bit about the responses that you have to your photography. Are people surprised by the places, the encounters, and the stories that your photographs reveal? How do people tend to react to your photographs?
I have the privilege of photographing things in very beautiful places, and my work is mostly centered around beauty, which means that I usually get quite a good response. There's generally what I do doesn't have, controversial, evocative feelings that come out of people. My focus is on showing the beauty of the natural world, and the lives of these other animals and creatures, with the goal of, people protecting these natural ecosystems and these animals. So in that sense, I feel very lucky to be able to focus on, beautiful things. um, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Yeah, I suppose just what kind of responses do you have? Are people surprised? Is it mainly a kind of a reaction of wonder and surprise at the stories, the places, and your encounters with animals? Does that tend to be the reaction?
Right. um, Yeah, because I spend time looking at animals that are living such wild and different lives. People are usually quite excited to see it. What I find interesting though is that, while I go out and I photograph these far-flung places like, erupting volcanoes and whales smashing into each other, a lot of my work is focused around animals that are very close to home, just normal animals that people don't pay as much attention to.
Mm,
So whether that's seagulls or gulls, or little lizards, insects that are hanging out inside of flowers, I think a lot of the time humans overlook the things that are in their backyards and just at their feet. And so, with a macro lens and some time and patience, I can photograph these worlds that people are fascinated by, and they look at it and they're like, "Wow, that's so incredible! What a beautiful thing!" And in reality, it's just outside in a flower. Like
mm,
it's actually very accessible to most people. It's just that most people don't delve deeply into those worlds. People are, caught up with, busy lives and jobs and families and things like that. And so I try and show people these hidden, far-flung places in the world, but I also try and focus just as much time on showing them the things in their backyard,
mm,
and saying, look, this is also here with us right now. There is life everywhere, and so
mm,
we need to take care of all of it, not just, the whales in the South Pacific or
mm,
the lions in Kenya, but like everything, even just the our local flowers. Don't
mm,
cut the grass because you have bees and you have insects that are interacting there. Let the flowers go.
yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting and so true. It took me going on an organized bat walk to realize that to see hundreds and hundreds of bats, all you have to do is literally look upwards at the right time of day to see all these bats just, steps from where I live.
mm,
Um, I wonder then if you could talk a little bit more about whales. You've talked about their personalities, you've talked about how they differ, how some of them are shy, some of them are playful, some of them are curious. Um, I wonder if you could talk more about what you've learned about whales. Have you learned anything new through your encounters and through the expeditions? What's the thing that has been, I don't know, the strongest learning experience for you about whales?
the strongest learning experience for me that has come from whales and translates, I think, just to nature in general, is anytime that someone says, this is how whales do a thing, this is how humpbacks do it, or they only do this, we see something different. So whenever, people say like whales always sing, facing down like that, the moment you say that, you see something different. And that is quite a good lesson, to understand that, they are multi-dimensional. They're not just one way of doing things. We often take animals And whales as well, historically, they have been looked at as, beasts that we have hunted, for their meat and their blubber and their oil and their bones and their resources. Um, and it turns out that they are very complex, and so they have, unique personalities. Even individual whales will sing differently, and you can tell, you can hear, like, oh, this one sings in this way, and 3/4 of the way through the song it starts to come up and then goes a long distance. Different mothers, they'll prefer to have you on one side. They might have the calf on the back side and you're on the front side, or maybe she wants to have the calf between you and her. Through my time with the whales, I've learned biological facts, but I've also learned, many behavioral things, and how to understand and read them in the way that, we humans, we spend a lot of time with cats and dogs. And so we learn how to approach a dog or a cat. How do they like to be pet? How do they like to, so that we have these safe and mutual interactions with them. The same thing happens with whales. The first time you swim with a whale, you don't understand any of the body language. You don't understand what the whale is doing. But as you spend more time with it, you start to learn what these subtle movements can mean. And reading not just all whales in general, but from one whale to another, how, their different personalities can dictate what kind of interaction they want to have with you. And that's quite interesting to get to know a whole species.
Yeah. And how about the people who go on your expeditions? What is it that they are most looking for when they go out with you?
I think that many people love whales and have been excited about whales their whole lives. We kind of lump whales into these mythical creatures like dragons and unicorns and, fairies and all of these other, like, hidden mythical creatures, but they're actually real. And that is quite exciting. And most people don't realize, at least for a while, people didn't realize you could swim with whales. And so, they hear about this opportunity, and most people are very excited about it. And they just want to be in the water with the whale because it can have quite a profound effect on you. I mean, they're so big. The size difference. Normally, animals we interact with are much smaller than us. So to have something that is the size of a bus, if it's a humpback whale, or if it's a blue whale, even bigger, can have quite a profound effect on people. And I've seen people come out of the water, crying, and it definitely can change people's lives.
To move from that to a rather more mundane question, then, when I mentioned this conversation to people, lots of people had kind of technical questions about how technical and practically difficult it must be to be able to take photographs of whales. I suppose things like the water itself and its temperature. You talked about having to kind of go and take a breath earlier, and then you couldn't go and take a breath because that photograph emerged and you had to, just take that photograph. The size of the whales as well must make it very difficult to fit the whale into the frame, that kind of thing. So maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the ways you manage the technical aspects and practical aspects of the photography.
Underwater photography in itself is a whole other complex thing where the lighting and the situation just changes. The first time I did underwater photography, it felt like I was doing photography all over again for the first time. Like, nothing made sense. You have, the way that the surface moves, whether it's rough or calm, the sun and the clouds, how deep the water is affects the lighting, whether the light gets sucked down, what is on the bottom. Is there sand? Is it just the depths? Is there coral reef? The different particles in the water and the clarity will affect, if there's little particles or if it's just murky, but evenly throughout the time of day. All of these factors change, and the white balance changes from the top to the bottom because you lose colors. And so your camera hardly knows what to do. And the rules function completely differently. So from that aspect, technically, it is very complicated. But then you're also in the space where you have these three-dimensional, creatures that are essentially flying, and so you're not just photographing one way. Like you're limited by your own body where you can go. So if you can dive down and hold your breath, you can get lower and get a different angle. And so you're working with all of these factors, that you're in this three-dimensional space. You've got this, lighting functions differently. Also, the camera, when you put it in the housing, all of the placement of the buttons is not the same as when you're above water, because you have to be able to access the whole thing from your two hands, basically. And so they've rerouted where the buttons go, and so different dials and knobs are in entirely different areas, and so you have to learn how to use the camera. And then you've got the equipment, fins and mask, and your wetsuit, and you can have waves, and you need to pay attention to me when I'm guiding. I need to pay attention to also, am I down current or up current of the whale, so that we're not drifting into it. I need to pay attention to the whale's behavior, as well as the other guests, to make sure that everybody has an eye on me and is not straying away towards the too close to the whale, and that we're all together. So it's a lot of complex factors, logistically speaking. Time spent in the water, though, you get used to those things, right? So the camera becomes autopilot, right? Like I can use the camera without thinking about it. I can also now take photos without even looking through the viewfinder, because I know what the angle is. I have the settings set up, and I'm keeping track mentally of my shutter speed, so that the image is fast enough. And then understanding the whale's behavior becomes second nature. So a lot of it becomes autopilot, but it is still a very complex thing. Now, for people who are just coming to swim with the whales, the more time they spend in the water, the more time they spend snorkeling, the easier it is. The advantage of whales being mammals is that they come up to the surface to breathe. So you don't actually have to dive down. You can just be right up at the surface. They're quite curious. I have a good crew captain that pays attention and drops us in a place, finds whales that are interested in interacting with us. And so it is a complex environment, but like any environment, when you spend time in it and you come prepared, then it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, there's loads there for, I think, for everyone who wants to know about that to just think about a lot more. Thank you. You've talked a lot about the impact that you hope to have, that you hope that people will think about, not just whales, but all animals, and think about how we work with them, how we interact with them, how we take care of them. And I think there's such a lot of potential for your work to contribute towards tackling the negative human effects on life below water. It feels like with your photographs, there's a real feeling of communication with the animals, and it feels quite different for me. I'm not, you know, I don't have a lot of so much experience of photography to be able to say this with any real authority. But when I look at most other underwater photography, it feels like the objects is to convey human mastery and domination over the space. And the human is this active central figure in the middle of their environment. And there are things like coral or tropical fish or other underwater life, which is a kind of odd spectacle and is vulnerable and startled. Whereas with your photography, it feels like it's always a passive human waiting respectfully for the animal to determine the kind of nature of that encounter. And I think that's what makes it very for me, very distinct and very different. It has so much more potential impact than the kinds of photography that people will be used to seeing. And I wonder whether you have a kind of overarching aim or ambition about your kind of whole photography project and what you hope to achieve or work towards by doing the work that you do?
Well, thank you for those kind words. With my photography, my hope, my overarching ambition and hope is that people see some of my work and these images and realize how beautiful our planet is, and that they can, take actions to pressure, politicians, companies, work with their communities to take a different perspective of our planet, that it doesn't revolve around us, but that we are just one animal, and that every other insect or creature or plant has just as much right to be here as we do. And that is a concept that for thousands of years we have been at odds with. We have been told that humans are the masters of this planet and everything else is for us to take and to use as we see fit. And the planet could sustain that for a little while, but it's gotten well out of hand, as we know. And we're losing animals species at such a rapid rate, and any species that goes extinct, I think, is a tragedy. And nature is this incredible library of knowledge and information and culture and history, and we are just burning the library. We have whole sections of the library that are going up in flames. So I feel an urgent need to do something with that. And for a long time, through my images, I try and change people's perspective. But in order to kind of help move that process along a little faster, I had all of these photos and videos, sitting in my hard drives, because when I go out and I film and I photograph, I take thousands of images, and this tiny, tiny sliver, just a fraction of it, actually goes out into the world, and everything else sits there. And at the same time, there's all of these nonprofits and people doing conservation work, really small scale, that desperately needed photos and videos. And so what I did is I partnered up with my cousin, and we founded an organization called Kogia, nonprofit, which we built it. We deal with science, nature, conservation, communication. So we built this library that is free to use for small scale conservation activism, biologists, people to try and communicate their work, to raise funding, to communicate to the public, to educate. And so we built this library. Right now it is ocean based. We will be expanding it to land. And from there, we've created this thing that we can use also to have more impact than just showing people beautiful work. We also launched this year a fellowship program, in where our pilot was in Wales, where we gave camera gear to 10 young people that wanted to be nature storytellers. And we did a workshop, taught them how to use the camera gear, how to photograph, how to film, and then sent them out to go and tell stories that they wanted to tell from their own community. They will get to keep the camera gear and to continue telling stories after the fellowship is complete. The idea of that is to basically start a program where around the world, young people have access to tell nature conservation stories and to work with local nonprofits and conservationists and scientists to be able to try and protect these places. Because we can look at it from a grand scale and say, we need to protect the planet. Our politicians are not doing anything about that. But on a local level, if communities are working to protect their own little local ecosystems, then I think these kinds of issues need to be tackled from both sides, from a big scale, from a small scale, from a corporate scale, from politics and religion and all of these different factors. And so what I'm trying to do is use my strength, which is, creating media and beautiful film work and photography, and bringing other photographers and filmmakers who have the same skill set together so that we can try and make an impact, and keep these places around so that everybody can go and enjoy being in nature and interacting with animals, and so that these animals and plants also can live a good life and not be under our foot, and that their future isn't determined by whether we decide to eat them or clear them away so that we can build a golf course or a house or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's brought us to quite a nice moment, probably to think about last couple of questions, or finishing up quite soon. I suppose one thing I was wondering about was your other work, your kind of commercial work. So you also do work for photography for things like swimming clothing ranges and things like that. And I wondered whether you managed to kind of carry your ethos into that work. What kind of selections do you make when you take on those clients? What kind of demands do you make of them? And how does it kind of work in terms of, it's quite a different kind of subject matter and quite a different mood that you're creating? It would be just really interesting to hear about those
Yeah.
aspects of that work too.
I love photographing everything. I like photographing people and cultures and different styles, documentary, but also I do enjoy photographing sports and outdoor clothing. And I find it all quite interesting, and to challenge myself and do different types of photography. So when I started photography, wildlife and nature was the thing that captivated me the most. But there's a lot that can also be learned from those other types of photography. If you photograph people, you'll get better at photographing animals. If you photograph insects, you'll get better at photographing landscapes. It all ties in together because you're working with light and angles. And so, in order to also do other things, I do work with, I do some commercial work where I film people and photograph, different brands. My ideal scenario is those scenarios where people are in nature.
Mm.
So there still is that interaction with the natural world, which is why I like the outdoor clothing. But I try and find brands that are doing good things and that are not ravaging the planet. It's difficult to always vet that and assess.
Yeah.
I don't always get it correctly. There are companies that I say no to, but in general, I think we can look at things as greenwashing or pandering towards a culture, but at the same time, we do need companies and that culture to shift towards brands that are doing good things for the planet, even if their motivation is purely just corporate greed and money. If we push in that direction so that other companies see that, that's the popular thing, I think that's the direction we need to go, while also trying to minimize consumerism and this constant buying things and making things just for the sake of it. So it's tricky. What I like doing is sports, extreme sports photography and filmmaking, because it's people rock climbing or kayaking, windsurfing, surfing, things like that, or outdoor clothing, where people are using it to go free dive or swim or hiking, which gets people out into nature. And I think hopefully that isn't at odds with the other work that I do, and that it at the same time also pays the bills so that I can go out and photograph and film more in nature.
Yeah. As a final question, then, do you have a kind of personal creative ambition? Is there a place in the world that you have never visited or never photographed that you would like to photograph? Is there a creature, an object, a story that you still like to tell that has so far evaded your opportunity? What would you really like to do in future?
There are places that I have never been, so many places that I would like to go, such as Antarctica and spend time in Central Asia. There's also animals that I would love to see in the wild and photograph. and then other animals and stories that are not as that don't get as much attention, like coyotes, that are often overlooked. But it's hard to pick one specific thing, especially when I photograph and I see an animal. I want to spend more time showing their stories. I have recently been able to spend time with Arctic foxes, and all it did was make me want to spend more time photographing Arctic foxes because they're so dynamic. So once I get into a thing, then I start to spend more time doing it. And I like to dive into different worlds, and for a while I'll get into something. When Iceland doesn't have a lot of small animals, and so when I'm here, I'm not doing macro photography, but when I'm visiting family in Hawaii, then I have this macro lens that I can put in the water, and it does wide angle, and I can photograph up. And so I can get these unique angles of animals that people normally don't see. And so that's something that I'll dive heavily into. But in terms of, being able to see, like, there isn't one specific project. I'm simultaneously working on lots of different projects. I think what I would like to do more is spend more time telling stories about places and animals and people and their interaction, rather than just creating one-off images. So taking a little bit more time to build out a story in the style that National Geographic does, BBC, these nature documentaries, which I sometimes work with to help tell those stories. So I think this world, it is so big. There's so much to see. There's so much to share. And I don't think I'll be able to see all of it and tell all of the stories. But if I can spend more time outside in the world, photographing, filming, and sharing that with people, and less time, doing emails and computer work, that is my overarching goal, is to just be out in nature and share that beauty and wonder with people, so that we can all at least be able to appreciate what we have here on Earth.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us, for talking so much about your experience, about everything to do with your career. It's been really fascinating, just as fascinating as I had hoped it would be, and such a wonderful opportunity to hear more about your work and to meet you. So thank you so much for being with us for Formations.
Thank you so much as well. Thanks for having me.